Alrighty, guys. So in this game, we are going to be looking at Anubarak. Now, just to kind of go over again, these are part of the Patreon replay reviews. So these are people that have goals in the game that they're looking towards improving. They are part of the Patreon. I have a $15 subscription. You're allowed to post one replay per month. And I go through and review those replays, and the ones that allow me to post publicly, I will post on my YouTube channel. With some exceptions, I don't post all of them if there's a particular player that's making a major mistake that I don't want to be bullied by any other players, things like that. There's also some other reasons why I won't post them publicly, but for the most part, if it can improve other players and it's not too repetitive, then that's something that I'm going to be looking at. This game, we're going to be looking at Anubarak, and let me just double check that there wasn't anything else. Looks like it was just a game with friends, nothing too crazy. So I would imagine this game, we don't need to look heavily at every little piece, but I do want to point out something really quick. No one on your team is getting soak bottom or top, and the early game siege damage just generally isn't worth it on a map like this. And my reasoning for this is the middle camps can already get a ton of value, and a little bit of damage here and there on structures just isn't usually that worth it. Remember, heroes scale, minions scale, camps scale, but structures do not. What I mean by this is it's a lot easier to take structures later in the game than it is early in the game. So committing a lot of time into taking structures early in the game may cost you an early lead. I saw Zagara just go up top, and that means that she's going to get soak when your team isn't going to get soak. Something like that is, again, one wave of soak is worth more than 2 kills early game. So you need to make sure to grab that soak. Now, he actually is just going for structure damage instead of pushing. I would give her the same feedback. If she pushed, she would cost you guys a full 2 kills, where getting an early structure isn't really going to make that big of a difference. There are a few maps where getting that early objective or that early structure would be really worth it, like Sky Temple, where getting the front walls on like the top area and then the objective gets a full fort as opposed to getting half a fort, which means that you guys have a more valuable objective than the opposing team. But on a map like this, it's generally not that big of a deal. One turret up in the top lane that ends up costing you a death is not a good trade, because one boss is going to be able to take 2 turrets so much easier. So as long as you get an experience lead, you can use that experience lead to get an easier boss. That being said, let's take a little bit and look about Anubarak. In my opinion, Anubarak is one of the strongest tanks in the game right now. Anub'arak has been buffed a couple of times, and Anub'arak was already one of the best counter pick tanks against teams that played a lot of mages. In this case, they're playing 2 mages and an auto attacker, but even in her auto attack build, she does still a significant amount of spell damage. So, the reason Anub'arak's so strong against double mages is primarily because he has that 40 spell armor whenever he needs it. There's ways to kind of enhance that a little bit, and I heavily recommend going into like the W build if you see a lot of mages or you see a lot of like sustained damage that can reset a lot with level 7. I do want to point out one quick thing though. The level 4 that you decided to go here, Under King, while I do like it if you know for sure you're going to have a lot of follow-up, Bed of Barbs is very, very good on this map. Any map where people have to channel a point, you can throw your Bed of Barbs right here, and the enemies won't be able to channel to take the point back because they'll be constantly taking damage from the ground. Because this is not technically damage over time, but instead it's ground reapplying damage every so often, it will continually interrupt objective channels. So on maps like this, on maps, I mean, this is kind of the best map to take Bed of Barbs, but any map where you have to channel an objective and there's like a small area to do so, you should always be taking Bed of Barbs. Bed of Barbs also gives you some wave clear. So if your team doesn't want to handle wave clear, well, I guess Under King could too, well, because you just have to use your E for it. But generally, you don't want to use E for wave clear. I guess like in a pinch, this also gives you wave clear. Shed Exoskeletons, also a really good talent. But I will say some people kind of use it as a crutch. What I mean by that is they, ooh, this is a solid body block. Great engage, repositions where you were in front of Brightwing, and then stunned again, auto attacked while body blocked. That was solid. Some people use it as a crutch. Basically, they take really bad engages, knowing that they can use the extra movement speed to get out. And what happens is people get used to taking bad engages. I would rather you know the perfect engages to go in on, and then you don't need to take a talent, and you can only take it if you really have to, rather than taking it because you feel like you need. Oh, so we're just going e-build. I'm down. E-build is it actually was played a little bit in the past. How it generally worked in the past is people would take Regen Master, they would take either Bed of Barbs or Under King. Generally, they would take Bed of Barbs because your goal was to trigger Acid Drenched Mandibles, and so you would take Regen Master so you would get a lot of health because the whole purpose of this build was anti-burst, and then you would jump in with kind of extra damage, a big shield. You'd have an extra shield with your hardened carapace. And in the competitive scene back in the day, if you jumped in like this, if you didn't get a kill immediately, you would die. And so this is why it was so valuable to run this build. You'd have an extra 500 health, you'd get a giant 500 health shield, and you would also have a lot of burst potential to follow up because Beta Barbs would slow them. You'd trigger Acid Drenched. But some people wouldn't take Bed of Barbs because your E would already slow them for long enough to trigger Acid Drenched Mandibles. And so generally, people kind of shifted to this version of the build where you go Regen Master, you go Under King, and you go Subterranean Shield. This is actually the build that I recommended for a long time before he got the buffs to all of his Beetle Talons. I recommended W build and E build as opposed to like the hybrid build because I just felt like the E talents were really underrated. This is very good as well. Use the beetles to block the objective. If you guys are ever unsure about how to do that, or if they spawn in multiple areas, then generally what you want to do is you want to pull them both close to each other, and then you'll summon beetles, and then you'll walk around. It's a lot easier to do on this map than it is to do on the plant map. Plant map, it's still possible, but it's definitely a little bit more challenging. Again, one Q down here instead of you. And this is another thing that's a little bit of a pet peeve for me. When you kill these minions, they just respawn. So if you really are worried about your health, then I recommend, okay, clear the minions so that you have time to have them like spawn over here and run over to you. But if you're playing someone who you don't really care about your health, I would rather you keep control of the units and not waste your abilities because you could have used your Q to interrupt, got an extra 3 seconds on there, and then you could have used your E to get away. Maybe a couple extra seconds if you didn't end up going Bed of Barbs. And you wouldn't have had your burned as much mana. So I generally don't recommend people kill those unless they have to. It's just kind of a waste of mana because they're going to just respawn anyways. And the damage mitigation from them respawning just generally isn't worth it if you're playing a tank. You guys do have almost 2-level lead. Yeah, I was about to say, just engage at will. A good chunk of damage. Why is this not spawning? Oh, you have it toggled off? Why do you have it toggled off? Why do you take the talent and then leave it toggled off? I understand, like, reasons for toggling it off, like if you're hiding in a bush or, ooh, that's really good going in on the carry. Nice job. And that was something that there was always a debate because I used to recommend Under King, and people would always say the Bed of Barbs is better, and they would like add up the damage potential of Bed of Barbs, and they'd be like, oh well, if it does 31 damage per second and it procs 4 times because of the 0.5, it ends up being like this much damage, and then like your E is only 135, so if you double the damage, like Bed of Barbs equals the same amount except for it's more valuable. I'm like, yeah, but one's burst and one's not. You know, it's hard to compare sometimes, but burst damage is always so much more valuable. If it's like if all things are the same, burst damage is so much more valuable because it gives them less time to heal. Again, good engages. You don't need a cocoon or anything. You probably should still toggle your beetles back on though. Eventually. Otherwise, again, it would be better. Currently, you just don't have a level 1 talent, right? I mean, they have 30 spell armor, I guess, but 30 spell armor isn't really that worth it. Oh, you toggled it on. Okay. Cocoon targets, and this is actually, I was going to make a full video about Cocoon because Anubarak was one of the heroes I used to hit Grandmasters, and he was also one of the heroes I used in my Bronze to Master for Tank. And I remember I had like on my Grandmaster account, I had like a 67% win rate with Anubarak, and I would have people call me out a lot of times because they were like, "Oh, why aren't you cocooning like everyone in front of you?" And I had a rule. I had a few rules, but basically, if people are running away, you always want to cocoon because if your team's chasing, you're already winning the fight. Cocoon forces one person to stay in the fight, and so it generally forces the enemy team to either give one kill or to try to fight down a person. Both situations are bad, so if your team's ever chasing, you always cocoon a target. Generally, someone who doesn't have an escape on their own. Um, the next two options for cocoon are you want to cocoon what their team has the least of. So, for example, if they have two tanks, or like a tank and a bruiser, you don't usually want to cocoon their tank because then their bruiser can usually kind of hold the front line until the cocoon is broken. So instead, you want to cocoon the healer because they're going to have two DPS, two frontline, and one healer. Cocoon the healer. Now you get a fight during the time that they're trying to break the cocoon. You're CCing them, you're fighting them, and they have no heals. By the time the healer's up, it's going to be too much to manage, and you win the team fight. If they have two healers, one tank, you cocoon the tank and you dive in on their backline. While their tank's cocooned, your whole team is running at their backline. They're getting stunned, they're getting double stunned, and they don't have time to heal because they're getting overwhelmed. So against two healers, again, you're going to cocoon the tank. Against all backline, you cocoon the tank and you dive their backline. You force a fight when they're not ready and they have no peel. So, following the first rule, they were running away. Cocoon one of the members that doesn't have an escape. But if this was a 5v5, I would most likely cocoon the Johanna and then dive the back. There is an exception, which is cocooning the target that has the fastest cocoon clear. Or you can jump on that target. I've had times where I go against a Tassadar and I needed to follow my first few rules in order to win the fight, but I knew Tassadar could clear the cocoon fast. So I'd cocoon the tank and dive immediately onto Tassadar. I would kill the Tassadar, at least distract him enough to where he couldn't clear the cocoon, and we would be able to rush in and kill their backline before the tank got out of cocoon. But those are basically the rules of cocoon. And then the rules of tanks and CC always still apply. Try to CC targets your team is already attacking, giving your team more time to attack. Anubarak's one of the biggest mistakes that I see of Anubarak players when they're playing in random games is they'll dive in on targets their team is nowhere nearby, and the CC ends by the time your team gets close enough. So, we've seen it already. The Hanzo was nearby. Hanzo attacks a target. He jumps in, double stuns the target Hanzo's attacking, leads to a kill. So, he's been following those rules very, very well. We see that Brightwing is stuck. The fight was forced. Like I said, a 4v3 was forced because of that cocoon. It turned into a 4v4, but it initially started as that. The objective is out. It's time to go pick what lane you want to go in and summon some beetles to tank for the objective. One of my favorite kind of extra features of Anubarak is the ability to, and this is the one thing that I would learn from this particular game, use your beetles to tank. Use them as Sylvanas. There's like a Sylvanas in every role. A lot of people are like, oh, the Sylvanas of tanks is Mei because your snowball turns off structures, but it only turns off structures for like 3 seconds out of 10 seconds. Where beetles can actually block structure damage for a huge portion of the fight. And in fact, if you take the level 16 Beetlejuice, you can permanently have beetles out even against double towers, against keeps, against almost anything. You can have enough beetles out with a level 16. You don't need to take that level 16, but you can have that tank. Because look, I mean, we lost half the health of this. You could have had the beetles block the majority of that, and you would have still had a very healthy objective. I understand you wanted to stop someone in rotation, lead to kills, but the objective on this map is pretty powerful, so I would rather keep the health bar up. It's one of the few objectives in the game that it leads to an average of 2 forts on the first objective. Where like the first objective on Dragonshire generally only leads to like front walls. The first objective on most maps generally only like front walls. This objective is one of the few that generally will lead to 2 forts on the first objective, average. I've seen it take all the way up to 3 forts and a keep off a single objective. You're playing, yeah, you're playing Anubarak, and you have the extra range. You always want to try for something. Whenever you guys are chasing, you lead to a kill. You always want to try for something. You should go for boss. You have beetles to tank the boss's auto attacks, so that's one of the safe things about Anubarak. Decided to go burning beetles. Burning beetles is good. Acid drench is a tad bit more burst damage. Urticating? I don't know. Spines is also a tad bit more burst damage. Burning beetles definitely is the most damage over time, though. Generally, in this build, people go acid drench, but acid drench is kind of old school. It is more burst damage on whoever you're jumping in on, but I will say burning beetles is a lot more consistent at answering objectives. And ooh, that was bold. That was another one that it's bold because even if you landed like that stun or you went in, your team's not close enough to follow up. You could potentially cocoon and ping your team, but it's very, very risky because that cocoon could be used to just, I don't know, close out a game, close out a good team fight. But I mean, you decided to come back around, so that's a little crazy. Again, this is my favorite cocoon. Cocoon the tank. Your whole team dives on their back line. You kill 1 or 2 members, and now that tank's stuck in a really bad spot. Tanks generally take a lot longer to kill, so killing all the enemies DPS makes it to where you can kill the tank without really any fear. But in this case, the tank will use Falling Sword to get out, so you'll kill these 2 members. And I would probably go for a boss and then the objective, or you'd go for both. You'd grab the objective with just you because you can get it using your beetles, and then I would have your team go for the boss. With boss and the objective, you guys could likely end the game bot lane. Because part of the objective will go top, part of the objective will go bot. Oh, I guess Vala was gone. I wonder if Vala was gone when you guys jumped in on her. Kind of weird. I don't know if you're intentionally toggling that on and off or if that's something that's like a bug in replay. I don't really see a reason to have it off while you're... You see, like, you're toggling it off again. There's no real reason to have it off right now. While you're backing, you might as well be sending beetles through. I get if you're, like, hiding in Fog of War or you're... But, like, while you're mounted, your Scarab beetles are going to be toggled off by default. You should be mounted while you're waiting in Fog of War, while you're waiting in bushes. So I generally don't see people manually toggling that off. Like, it wouldn't hurt to have a beetle there. Are you doing it for the burst, I wonder? Where you're like, you're charging in and you're toggling it on, that you make sure that you have that extra beetle when you charge in. But again, I'm going to come back to when you are mounted, it doesn't spawn, and it won't spawn until you reach the burrow charge, right? And if you forget it even once, it defeats the purpose of holding it that whole time. So you could cocoon her. You've already used her ult. Like, you could just cocoon her and go to their backline. But it looks like, okay, so your team got the kill anyways. I generally recommend leading with Q instead of E because E is a large commitment where Q's not. They're both, I mean, with practice, they're both easy to time. But if she dashes away, then E allows you to get over to her easier, where Q could just mean that she's gone. I'm not going to harp on the timing of that because it's really hard to time it while someone's attacking it. It's really easy to time it if no one's attacking it. You have decent ping, but if like Vala's attacking it, it gets really hard to time because if she stops attacking for even a second, then all you guys' abilities are wasted. But if she keeps attacking, then it's still valuable. This is good. You're using, you're kind of positioning yourself away from these guys so that the burning beetles don't cause the structure to attack you. Might as well jump in on them. That's fine. You burned Ice Block. Didn't really cost you anything. You did go with Beetlejuice. Generally in the E build, oh, that's my notification, not yours. Let me close that out. Sorry, guys. Okay. Most people go Epicenter because one, it makes it easier to land your E, which your build really relies on that 100% more damage. But two, it lowers the cooldown of your E, and because you have two talents that are benefited by E, more E's are more valuable. So generally, if you're going E talents, take Epicenter. If you're gonna go Beetlejuice, you might as well take Leeching Scarabs because you want that bonus attack damage on the beetles, and you want to be healed for what the beetles are doing. So if you're gonna take it, it's just a synergy thing, and this happens with a lot of talents in Heroes of the Storm. If you take one talent for a particular ability, it's usually beneficial to take all the talents for that ability. I'm saying usually, there are a lot of exceptions to this, but because if you increase the range of something or the size of something, suddenly all your talents get more valuable. If you decrease the cooldown, all your talents get more valuable. So it's like taking like multiple talents of something on one tier because it's like it's enhancing all their it's your talent is enhancing the ability, but your later talents are enhancing the ability of your talent to improve your ability. Like it sounds crazy, but it's like that synergy adds up quite a bit. So I would adjust your build slightly, but other than that, this game has been a solid game. And if you guys learn anything from this, you add the few recommendations that I said, you guys can easily hit masters if you follow this play style. Stun targets your team's already attacking. Follow my rules for cocoon. Use your beetles to tank the structures for you. Use your beetles to take objectives easier. You guys could have ended the game if you would have done objective boss, but that's okay. Got 3 extra minutes to talk about stuff. Anubarak's builds are generally pretty straightforward. You can take all the same talents. If you're going W build, you take W at 1, W at 4, W at 7, W at 13, and then you take Epicenter. If you're going Beetle build, you're going to take Beetle at 1, Beetle at 7, Beetle at 13, Beetle at 16. You can take Epicenter instead, depending on your need and your ability to safely auto-attack. If you can't ever safely auto-attack, you go Epicenter. Epicenter is just the best because it allows you to engage, have a lower cooldown on your engage, potentially use this as a disengage, and it also makes it where you're more likely to land your engage on more targets or even just the target you're aiming for. We have Falling Sword. You hop in there. You should cocoon. Cocoon. You guys win this fight because you're up 3 levels, but you definitely should have cocooned early on. These guys have no front line, so if you get rid of their Johanna, all the damage is much more impactful. You throw a bunch of damage on a tank that you can't kill, and suddenly that's all wasted damage. Look at how much damage you guys did to Johanna. Now imagine spreading that amount of damage out between the people that are surviving, right? Instead of doing, I would imagine, what's probably about 3,000 damage here. If you did 3,000 damage here and here, this person's probably dead. And if you did it early on to the healer, then the healer's dead and they didn't get any of this healing, so all of their backline's going to be like 20% health. Cocoon early. The second that shield is broken, and especially if she's already used Falling Sword, then you can literally just cocoon, kill the backline, and then ping the cocoon, and you can kill the tank. But yeah, to continue on the build conversation, if there's not a talent that matches your ability that you're on, then you'll try to grab the best individual value talent at that tier. You took a burn talent. Holy Fury. You can cocoon and like regen a little bit. This is the thing. You're waiting for a bunch of abilities to come back. You're all kind of low health. This is a great time to just cocoon. Because you guys are already gonna set up for the objective and you can get a boss, so you can still win the game with an objective boss. And so staggering a kill would be good, and just making it to where you don't have to risk it. But you also have your E back up soon. It just comes down to if she can dodge it or not, which she does. I haven't like pre-watched or anything. It's just that I saw Zag mid and right wing. It's like you better cocoon earlier because right wings can get away. And cocoon's only like a 70-second cooldown, so it's not like you got to think about it this way. If death timer's late game or 40 seconds and travel time is 30 seconds, you can cocoon every single time you see the enemies. And if you are good at it and you cocoon every time you see the enemies and you lead to a kill every time that you cocoon or a team fight victory, then you should be using your cocoon off cooldown. And imagine staggering at death too is really important because you guys could get some extra value. But it doesn't really matter. You guys are about 13. The standard talent to take at 13 is Rewind. I will say Hive Master's too slow. Even if you take that talent, it's too slow. Cryptweave has gotten buffed, but I still don't like it. I find it's just not... It's still damage over time. If it was Exit Cocoon and you immediately take that damage, it'd be a little bit more valuable, but it still wouldn't be like meta. It's great if you really need to remove someone from a fight for a long time, but you have to stay near it, and that's not generally what you do. You cocoon their tank and you dive past to their backline. The Cryptweave generally doesn't get a lot of value. I actually really like Trader King. I think this is a really good talent, but it's just outshined by Rewind. But I do recommend it in a few situations. Full Beetle build, it's actually a pretty solid talent because 75 armor for 4 seconds gives you a lot of time to auto attack. That being said, Rewind gives you like 4 extra beetles for free. So feel free to take either or in Beetle build. I think in W build, you always want to take Rewind. In E build, you generally are always going to want to take Rewind. The only time I would probably adjust is maybe if you take Locust Swarm, because then for 6 seconds, you're healing 53 health. By each enemy that's around you, and you could also have 75 armor. So if this was a 60-second cooldown, it would align better with Trader King. You could pop both of them when you're at like 30% health, and you'd be able to gain like your whole health bar back. That would be a fun build. But until they make this a lower cooldown, it's basically always Cocoon Rewind, and then the rest of your build shifts based on the enemy team comps. She still has teleport, so you're not going to want to stand here. You want to instead stand here, right? You want to zone out whoever is going to be her teleport target, because she's going to be teleporting as soon as she gets out. You want to stand near her teleport target, and when she teleports, you're going to stun, take a step back, and you're going to charge in and stun again. And if you have rewind, you're going to rewind and do the whole thing again. Instead, use your abilities. But again, I haven't pre-watched, but you can kind of predict this stuff. And you guys close out the game. So, moral of the story, you played very, very well. I mean, it seemed like you were playing against people that were considerably lower than your rank. I would imagine that Play to Improve is probably a Smurf. I would imagine Barcode's probably a Smurf. And since I know this is a Smurf, it's kind of a stomp game. That being said, I think our viewers can learn quite a lot about this game, about how to approach fights, how to kind of go with confidence, how to adjust your build a little bit, when to cocoon, and when to stun. So hopefully this helps everyone out that has watched this video. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them below, or better yet, join the Discord, which will be in the description, as we answer a lot of questions on our Discord. If you would like to have your replays reviewed, I'm currently only doing Patreon, and that means that you have to join a monthly subscription. But if you are interested in having your replays reviewed, it is only $15 a month, and I do think there are spots available, or at least there were when this video posted. Thank you all, and feel free to check out any of my other videos.